Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow reptilian. My name's Scyushi, and we're back here for some more Trove. I totally just woke up. Yep. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of a different tutorial. I know we still got to get class tutorials of 2019 for every single class in the game. But, I'm kind of on the mend from being sick. I'm feeling a lot better now, as you can obviously tell. But I just woke up because I got to rush this video out to you guys because today, I'm going to go and get a black pug. So Jub is going to have a sister. It's going to be so cool. But anyways, today we're going to be talking about the best classes for Shadow Tower. Don't let this be confusing with, I don't want you to get confused. We're not talking about speed running necessarily. I'm talking about general Shadow Tower use, because there's a lot of characters that you can actually use very, they're very viable for Shadow Tower, but we're going to be talking about the best of the best. So first, let's mention the honorable mentions. So Candy Barb is going to be one of those classes where the only reason people end up even using it is just to increase the speed at which you're killing Shadow Tower bosses, because your ultimate ability is going to end up giving all the characters around you a bunch of attack speed. Now, I know we said we weren't talking about speed running, but one Candy Barb is pretty much essential to speed running, and then you use everybody else. Everyone else is going to either be using a Gunslinger or Ice Sage, from what I heard is a new strat people are using. I don't know. I don't care. But then there's also going to be Fey Trickster as a character that technically is viable for Shadow Tower. Fey Trickster definitely has the damage. But unfortunately, Fey Trickster is one of the highest single target damage, so there's not really that much crowd control or anything. So I just wanted to mention that although it's possible to get through Shadow Towers with Fey, you have high enough damage, you're not going to be outputting enough to every individual target. So you can very well use Fey for like bosses and stuff like that, but getting through the towers themselves might end up being a bit of a problem. And then before we get to the best of the best, I want to mention Pirate Captain. I know lots of people like using the Pirate Captain. Personally, I never used Pirate because the one thing that I don't like about him, he's got the damage. That's no problem. He's got AoE as well. That's also no problem for him. The biggest thing is that you're pretty much relying on your turrets and your ult, and those are going to just target random things. So you can't control what they attack. You'll be throwing down your number one until the cows come home, obviously, but the problem with this character and using it in Shadow Towers is just that you're not going to be able to pick your targets. So again, another character that is definitely viable for bosses, but maybe not necessarily for getting to the bosses, because that's the thing. Shadow Towers pretty much get broken into the climb to the boss and then the boss itself. And more so than that, the bosses themselves are going to end up varying based on your character's strength. For the most part, you're going to be able to solo Spike Walker, Weeping Prophet, Pinata. Hydra is when it starts getting tough, and we'll talk about each of the bosses in a little bit more detail in a moment. But I wanted to mention Knight as kind of the last in honor of, this is a character you can definitely use in Shadow Tower. He's definitely one of the higher tiers. He's not completely top tier, but a lot of people don't really think that the Knight is as powerful as he is, because the Knight actually has had his rework done to the class, and he's actually very, very viable, not only just for U9 and U10 farming as well, but he's also very, very good for Shadow Towers, because you're pretty much reliant on your number one ability, and that's going to have crazy crowd control because it actually phases through the enemies, and it being a physical target that you shoot out of your character means you don't gotta worry about projectile detection. It's going to end up being very good. Now, the one thing that the game kind of glitches out about is that maybe you'll be running to the left and you're trying to use your attack, or running to the right, and sometimes your character might shoot to the left or the right because the game itself is having detection issues of, oh, you're supposed to be shooting forward. It doesn't know where your mouse is aiming, more so where your character is aiming. That's just an issue that I ran into sometimes. But Knight is definitely a character you can end up using. I don't know if you'd be able to use it all the way up at Hydra, because let's talk about the bosses here, guys. So Spike Walker is going to be easy peasy. The one thing that sucks about him is his hit detection is bogus. Whether you're, ranged characters are going to have an easier time with him. Melee characters kind of suck because unfortunately he's hovering off the ground right at the center, and he's always going to be looking at you. So you can't like attack his legs or anything like that. Usually what I'd recommend is you get underneath him and start attacking, and depending on the character that you are, you jump in the air continuously and keep attacking and just kind of keep that bounce going. Sometimes you'll kill Spike Walker super quick, and sometimes you won't. If you're ranged, it's not as much of a problem, except for the crummy hit detection. Weeping Prophet's probably the easiest boss in the game because of the hit detection actually working properly with this guy, because his hitbox is just a giant pillar, right? So he's not a problem. You know, sometimes you gotta deal with his minions, but he's pretty easy. When you're dealing with Vengeful Pinata God, that's where it can get a little bit difficult. Depending on how powerful your character is, this is where you have to have enough damage output in order to defeat this guy quickly. And depending on your class, you know, this is where we'll talk about the top tiered Shadow Tower classes. You know, you got to have like a character that is doing a lot of crowd control. So Gunslinger, for example, has the output of damage, but I generally find that a different character is better for defeating Vengeful Pinata God, just because he's going to be summoning minions and they're going to be getting in the way of your projectiles and stuff like that. Hydra is one of the tougher ones because in order to beat him, you have to have an insane amount of output for damage. Or generally just be ranged. Like, you can't really beat this guy as a melee character, you know, which, you know, we'll talk about the classes that can actually handle this guy in a bit, because otherwise I want, before we get to Dreadnought and Dot, I want to start talking about these other characters. So there's going to end up being Gunslinger, obviously. He's pretty much the strongest actual damage in the game. Even more than Fate Trickster and stuff. He's just insane damage output so long as you have your alt cast, especially if you have attack speed buffs and stuff like that. You know, we're not going to be talking necessarily about how you're building these characters, because I'll have individual build videos for all these guys, and I have a bunch for some of them already. But Gunslinger is just going to be your kind of standard go-to for everybody. Everyone's always going to recommend using Gunslinger for Shadow Tower. Personally, not my favorite. Not my favorite Shadow Tower, because he's not going to be the best at getting to the boss. He's going to be really good at clearing the boss, depending on which one you're fighting. I find that he can solo Hydra no problem, just because you can bounce in the air. And, you know, anytime you start getting too low, you use your number one, you boost yourself up. And then all you really got to do is watch out for the acid particles, because what'll happen with Hydra is he'll shoot acid at you and it can explode right in the air, and then you'll see bubbles floating in the air. The bubbles themselves are what's actually doing the acidic damage, whereas the actual acid on the ground isn't doing anything. It's just a liquid. So you really got to watch out for those bubbles. That's where you're trying to kind of, you know, duke him out back and forth and make sure that his targets, you know, make sure he shoots where you're not going to be. Because the way that Trove's targeting works, if for enemy AI or lack thereof, is if you're going left, the enemy is going to shoot where you're going to be. Like, the game actually just blatantly calculates where you're going to be, and that's where it's going to shoot. So what I often will do is I'll be pulling to the left, Hydra will shoot, and then I'll pull to the right as the projectile is out in the air. The timing is a little bit weird, but that's pretty much how you deal with Hydra. You want to stay off the ground so you don't got to deal with his minions. Gunslinger can solo Dread, but I mean, again, this is where I personally would prefer to use another class. You can do it, though. You just got to make sure that you have a little bit of defensive skill. You're going to have to be using Unyielding, just so that you get that brief invulnerability, rather than using something like Chromatic to give you the cooldown on your ult. And then Daughter of the Moon is actually way easier. If you can beat Dreadnought, you can beat Dot, no problem. Dot is just going to be about you kiting. That's pretty much it. So long as you're ranged, you're going to be able to beat her fairly easily, because anytime she gets too close, you just run away from her. And when she's dealing with her gun phase, all you gotta do is just do the same duke out that you would do with Hydra, where you just kind of dance back and forth. All you really gotta watch out for in her ranged mode is just her charge shot might do damage. And then when she gets to her final phase, that one's a joke, because literally you can stand in her face shooting her, and then anytime she's going to end up using either the chakra, you just dodge to the left, right, where just dodge in a direction to avoid damage from that. And then if she uses her lasers, you just slightly step to the left, because she's always going to be facing you, and she'll attack kind of straight into her left, and sometimes behind her. But she always attacks to the left. I don't know why, but this just happens. So you just shoot her in the face, slowly step to the left when she shoots her shot, and then you can step back into the right position and then just continue putting out the damage until Dot is actually dealt with. Okay, now that we've got the strat for the bosses kind of out of the way, we can talk about some of these other characters. So, Ice Sage is another one that already had a rework and definitely keeps up with, if not recommended more so than Gunslinger, actually. Ice Sage is extremely powerful now. You got a lot going with this character. I definitely got to do a proper tutorial for this character soon, because it's a bit more of a complex character, just because you're going to be using all of your abilities. So with this character, they've made it so that your basic attack is pretty much what you're going to be using non-stop when your ult is up, because your ult is going to give you max attack speed, and if you use your basic attack, you're going to be doing crazy amounts of damage. You can just be using your basic attack the entire time pretty much. I like to use the right click though when you're fighting the mobs up to the boss, just because it's got a lot more crowd control than the single target of just the shot. But that's just me. You know, you're going to be able to spam your freeze ability as well, pretty much on cooldown, so it's not going to be a problem to get through these bad boys. And then Hydra, you know, again, you're going to have to kind of be duking out similarly to Gunslinger. Most of all, you're trying to watch out for his little melee minions, because of course you're not going to have as much you're not going to have that gliding jump that the Gunslinger has. So make sure that you have enough jump when you're dealing with Hydra, and then you'll be able to deal with him easy peasy. For Dread, the funny thing is that Ice Sage was actually one of the OG classes that could solo this guy, because your number one ability actually, when the class got a rework, your number one swapped to your ultimate ability. So your number one was actually a shield, and it would take one hit of damage from Dread's stupid little laser, because that's pretty much the only thing that you actually got to worry about. It's funny how his nuke, his fire on the floor, all of that stuff, yeah, it's deadly, but it's easy enough to deal with. The problem with Dread is that one stupid laser that he shoots at you, because it works under the same projectile detection as I mentioned with Hydra. So he's always going to be anticipating where you're shooting. So as you fight Dread often enough, hopefully you'll get the hang of the timing of him actually shooting that laser, and then you can kind of whoop, whoop. Like every time he shoots, you strafe to the left or right, so that when his projectile shoots, you can dodge it by just slightly stepping to the right. Even then, I mess that up all the time, because he just shoots so frequently. I personally think that he needs a little bit of a nerf on that laser, because that laser, it's stupid. It's going to one-shot you. It doesn't matter how powerful you are. I've had it where I'm at like 5 mil health and I get one shot. Like, it's ridiculous. Well, maybe not 5 mil, but either way, he's crazy, man. He's super powerful, but you're going to be able to take him on as the Ice Sage so long as you have the damage output. Yeah. And then for Dot, super duper easy. Ice Sage was the original character that was going to be able to actually solo Ice Sage, or solo Daughter of the Moon, because your projectiles are going to slow her down. So you're pretty much doing the exact same thing that you did with Gunslinger, except she's going to be like walking super slow, so long as you keep that coolness proc on her. Yeah. And the thing is, sometimes you can get it to stack, and she'll just be completely immobilized. She'll just be standing and walking in place and trying to attack you, but she can't even get to you. So even if you're just going into Shadow Towers, not for soloing, just for general use, Ice Sage is definitely up there, because it's going to end up helping out the group very, very much. So keep that in mind with the freeze ability, right? Same with Gunslinger as well. You know, it's good to have a Gunslinger in the Shadow Tower group just because of the high damage output. Then there's going to be the Revenant. This character already got a rework as well. Lots of people think that I kind of undercut the Revenant, and most of all that's just because I personally don't like the Revenant's playstyle. But I'm always very, very clear and to the point in my videos, or at least I hope that I am, to say that the Revenant is a powerhouse. He's actually one of the stronger characters in the game, you know, because he ended up actually getting his rework, and he's crazy, dude. He actually had to get a little bit of a nerf because he was so powerful, but you can basically just have your number one on the whole time and then just use your normal attack, and you're going to have insane amounts of lifesteal that make you almost invulnerable to anything. This is one of the only melee characters that can actually take on Hydra, because of the fact that if your lifesteal works out well enough for you, you'll be invincible throughout the entire fight. It doesn't always work, okay? It's kind of a random chance type of thing. But the character has enough damage output, most definitely, for all of these bosses. And then once you get to Hydra, if you have enough lifesteal going on, if it's all in your favor, you know, you got your lifesteal gems and all that stuff, you could end up having a lifesteal ally if you want, then you should hopefully be able to heal out of the acid of the Hydra without actually having to waste a pot. Same goes for Dread. You're pretty much going to be doing the exact same thing outside of the fact that you are going to be a melee character, so Dread is generally going to end up being a lot harder for you just because of the fact that, you know, a lot of his attacks are going to end up being very close range and stuff. So, well, most of all, because you won't be able to dodge that stupid laser of his, right? So, if he, you know, when you get up and close and personal with him, sometimes you'll get a really good roll of attacks from Dread where he won't use his laser and instead he'll use all of his dumb melee attacks, which are very, very easy to dodge. This is like when he lowers himself and uses a shotgun out of his mouth or his saw blades and stuff like that. It's really, really easy to dodge all those attacks. Daughter of the Moon is going to be another one of those characters or another one of those bosses where you're going to have to be relying on your damage output. So you got to be strong enough in order to take her on, because melee characters generally are going to have a very hard time with Dot because a lot of her attacks are going to be melee. Once you get to that final phase though, then it's easy peasy as whatever character you are, right? I also want to mention that Neon Ninja can be good for a group. Most of all, I wouldn't recommend soloing. You used to be able to solo with Neon Ninja, but when they removed when you would activate Cursed Skulls, they would normally sit there, not transparent, and you could build up your shurikens as the Neon Ninja. So basically, you could build up your shurikens and throw them through the enemies, and then they all get snared so long as you have your Classroom ability, and that's how Neon Ninja could literally solo almost everything in the game, because you could get everything out of range from actually damaging you. That already, you know, that's been fixed a long time ago, where the Cursed Skulls now just go transparent, so the Neon Ninja has to get within melee range for any damage output, which doesn't really work because he's so squishy. You're going to get absolutely annihilated. But so long as you're playing with a group, Neon Ninja's got huge amounts of damage input, and having all the enemies snared in a spot can end up being very, very useful for some of the other characters that'll end up doing even more damage, right? So then after the Revenant, we've got, I guess we'll deal with Dino Tamer and then some of the other characters. So Dino Tamer is kind of an unsung hero. Lots of people don't give credit to this character. I think just because the character itself is kind of lame. You know, there's just something. I like the Dino Tamer. I think he's actually a cool character. But I think that they went the wrong route by making him human instead of making him like a dinosaur or something unique and cool. Generally, I just don't think people find him to be the coolest, and that's why people kind of undermine him. But this is a character that has always had really good amounts of damage. Most of all, really good amounts of survivability, because he's one character that doesn't rely on his energy. So you can cast your ult, you throw down your net, you can blast away, and you can jump without having to worry about your energy regen, because when you're jumping around, your energy is not going to regenerate for all of the other characters. But Dino Tamer doesn't have energy. Yeah, so Dino Tamer is one of the OG classes, again, that could not only solo Daughter of the Moon, he could actually solo all bosses. Yeah, he can actually take on all of Ultra Tower, just because he's got extreme amounts of damage input, so long as you have your net on the ground and continuously stay in your ult as much as possible, and then just shoot things and jump around like a freak. So because you're going to have insane amounts of movement speed as this guy, and if you have enough jump, you can avoid pretty much all damage. You know, or at least enough that you can survive through the tower before you end up being annihilated. I'd recommend using Death Defying and Shadow Towers, especially just because of the fact that almost everything in Ultra Shadow Towers is going to one-shot you. And I would also recommend for Dino Tamer, use Chronomatic, obviously. And then for most of the characters, you're going to be using Unyielding when you get to that Hydra and up tier. You can use Unyielding for the lower tiers, but you pretty much have to use the Unyielding emblem so that you have a brief invulnerability of being attacked after being attacked, because otherwise you're just going to and there goes all your pots and it's all done. Because you know, when you get to the boss, it's more of an endurance test, and when you're actually fighting up to the boss, it's more a test of strength, because with fighting all of the enemies, you know, you can just fight them in waves and then you just move on to the next wave machine or the next floor, whereas with the bosses themselves, you have to have enough damage output, yes, yes, but you also have to have enough survivability that you can last the entire fight, especially when you start getting to Hydra, because it's a lot tankier up there and onward. So Dino Tamer's really, really good for all these bad boys, and really, really good for Hydra, because of the fact that you're a ranged character. You can dance around and you just throw your net on him. So even if you're busy trying to survive, you don't really gotta worry too much about your damage output with this guy, because you're just gonna have that net sitting on the ground just doing continuous damage and soaking it up, right? So you can get through Hydra pretty easy. Dino Tamer has a bit of a hard time with Dread. Most of the classes are, because Dread's actually the strongest boss in the game. But I mean, you know, that again, like with Dino Tamer, it actually more so depends on your player skill and actually dodging that stupid laser of his. Because the other thing too is with Dino Tamer, you're gonna be so fast and running around the arena so much that you might accidentally step in his fire, or you might get close to, you know, dying by his nuke. Another quick tip I want to mention too is that when the Dread ends up using his nuke, if you roll just before that nuke hits the ground, while you're rolling, you're actually in invulnerability frames. So if you roll just before the nuke hits the ground, I always do that, because usually lag will end up being a factor. You know, sometimes you might just die just because of lag. But if you roll and then while you're in your rolling animation, the nuke explodes, you actually don't have to go all the way into the corner in order to dodge the nuke. It can be a bit risky, especially the first few times while you don't have the timing down, but it's essential in order to end up just continuously having the damage output for a lot of the melee characters. Ranged characters aren't going to be as much of a problem, because when you go into the corner, usually you can still cause damage to him anyway. But the reason why I don't like running into the corner when I'm fighting Dread is because it almost pretty much guarantees that you're going to be within striking distance of him using his stupid laser. So he's going to start walking up to you and he's going to laser you a couple times until you get close enough that he can actually randomly choose from other attacks. Yeah. And then for Dot, you know, that's going to be easy peasy as Dino Tamer, just because you're going to end up being an actual ranged character, so you can actually output, you know, and dance around and stuff like that. So then we'll talk about the Vanguard. Vanguard is another character that is very, very viable for Shadow Towers. I'd say one of the better ones, just because with your ranged and melee mode, you're pretty much prepared, right? Because melee characters do really, really well with all of the arenas and getting up to the boss, and then once you get to the boss, ranged is usually favored, because then you can stay away and have survivability depending on the boss. Like when you're dealing with Pinata, melee, obviously, Weeping Prophet, melee works better as well, and then Hydra, ranged, Dreadnought, ranged, and even Daughter of the Moon, kind of ranged. Yeah, I mean, you can still be melee with Dread as well, but it just doesn't really work as well as ranged. And then most of all, you just gotta watch for his stupid magic barriers and physical barriers and stuff, right? So Vanguard's gonna be a physical character, by the way, so the physical barrier is going to affect you even if you're in ranged mode. It doesn't actually count as magic damage. So with Vanguard, he's going to be a bit of a odd character to play, because you play him very differently in Shadow Towers than you do with normal farming. Because with normal farming, you're staying in melee mode. With Shadow Towers, what you're basically going to be doing is punching things, lasering until you have no energy, use your number one, change to ranged mode, shoot things, you know, spam your right click attack, blah, blah, blah. While you're doing all of this damage, you're going to be slowly reducing your cooldown so long as you have a class gem ability. Because when you're in ranged mode, I think it's every 4th or 5th attack is going to reduce cooldown, and when you're in melee, every uppercut is going to end up reducing cooldown. And then basically what you're doing is, as soon as you have cooldown, you're going to press your number one and you're going to swap back to melee mode, because melee mode has more damage output than ranged mode. And while you have that attack speed that you're carrying over from your ranged ability, you're just going to be using your basic attack and kind of get a continuous chain of output damage with the Vanguard. And when you're fighting, you know, tougher bosses, like let's say you're actually at like Daughter of the Moon, you just swap to ranged mode, and it's going to take a very long time because the damage output isn't viable for ranged mode in the Vanguard, but you will be able to solo it. And then last but not least, my favorite contender for the Shadow Tower is the Draco. I personally think that this, as far as just normal Shadow Tower business, is the all-around best character just because you have the survivability and you have the damage. And I mean, this is also considering that I use this character most of all for soloing Shadow Towers, and then anytime there's even one extra person that's doing extra damage with me, I know that I can get through the Shadow Tower no problem, and I can be very lazy. That's what this guy's playstyle is very, very laid back. So you're going to be throwing down your Draco babies, just non-stop spamming your #1 ability, okay? Spam it. Don't ever stop. All you're doing is just using it on cooldown, or not cooldown, using it as long as you have enough energy, and you want to have 6 Draco babies out at all times. You can hit your right click every now and then if you want to, but you don't really have to. I mean, it does do a decent enough amount of damage, so anytime you see a little Draco buddy light up, yes, you want to shoot your attack and actually get that extra damage on top of just your normal chain fire. But he's such a powerful character, dude. He's, you know, after he's gotten his rework, Draco is one of the top tier again. Not really the fastest as far as normal Uber farming, but for Shadow Towers, ooh, I love him. Because you're going to be able to get through everything pretty much. Hydra is going to be a problem. Yeah. So this is the one where I say I can solo it, but it depends on my roll of attacks that I get from Hydra. This is where if I've got other people with me, then I know I can beat Hydra, because I've got enough damage output and I've got enough survivability as the Draco that obviously you want to be spamming your ult on cooldown as well. But you got enough survivability as Draco that I can get him to 20 to 15% health just myself, and then usually I'll end up running out of pots by then. There's not really that much you can do as Draco to dodge this guy's acid though, and you're pretty much reliant on your energy regen, so that's why Draco kind of doesn't do it as well as some of the others when you come to Hydra. So if you're doing Hydra, make sure that you at least have somebody with you, because that's just going to end up making it that much easier. I mean, Shadow Towers is just going to get easier and easier and easier as you have more and more people with you, and then you get more powerful, it gets faster, so on and so forth. Dread is kind of a walking joke though. Draco can solo him no problem so long as you have the damage output, because you most definitely have the survivability, and while you have your little Draco babies all over the place, you actually don't gotta worry that much about this guy's laser, because even if he's just trying to target you, your little Draco babies are gonna get in the way half the time of all of his attacks, so he's no problem. I would actually say Draco's one of the best for actually taking on Dread. You know, that's my opinion anyways. Like, I've gone through Shadow Towers countless times. I've tried all these other characters that we've mentioned in the video, and for the most part, Draco is just the one that I always end up swapping to. Usually when I swap to Gunslinger, I find that my survivability goes down for the trade up of damage output, but I like having the survivability and the laziness that comes with playing Draco, because you can pretty much just stand there. You don't gotta dodge, you don't gotta do anything fancy, you just stand there and just kill things. And then Daughter of the Moon is gonna be a little bit trickier, just because you gotta kite her just enough that you keep her out of range of a lot of her attacks and stuff like that. But Draco thankfully does have enough range, and hopefully she'll end up targeting your Draco babies and be preoccupied with that, and usually it's just easy peasy because you're pretty much reliant on your babies. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers it, everybody. So again, Vanguard, Dino Tamer, Revenant, Draco, Gunslinger, Ice Sage, and then honorable mentions is Knight and Pirate Captain, and then Candy Barb, just so that you can end up using your ult, Neon Ninja only if you're using a group, and Fey Trickster, again, only if you're using a group, really. You got a decent enough amount of damage, though. The other characters, though, they don't really work. I mean, Tomb Raiser's kind of okay for survivability, but you don't have enough damage. Lunar Lancer just sucks in Shadow Towers. Chloromancer kind of sucks in Shadow Towers, I'm not gonna lie. Boomeranger obviously doesn't do anything in Shadow Towers, because you pretty much have to be using a bow, and your damage output is just not high enough as Boomer compared to so many other characters. So yeah, and Shadow Hunter you can use in Shadow Towers for sure. If you don't have any of these other characters at a viable level, you can use Shadow Hunter and you can get through most of the bosses, but the damage output just isn't going to be good enough unless you get completely awesome rolls and your ultimate ability actually works. I don't even necessarily mean awesome rolls within the game's, like, you know, confines. I'm talking about within the game's lag and bad code, because you have to, oh, pardon me, you have to have all of your ultimate abilities end up actually hitting an enemy with the Shadow Hunter to make him even slightly keep up with some of the higher damage output characters. But either way, why do you guys stand on me? Either way, thanks for watching. Hopefully you found this video helpful, everybody. I gotta try and get this out to you guys right away, because as this video is going up, I'm already on my drive out to go and get Budge, the black pug. Ooh, I'm so excited about it. Either way, thanks for watching, everybody. Very much appreciate it. Don't forget to like, sub, hit that notification bell. Have yourselves a great day. If you want to support me, there's all sorts of ways you can do that down below. We got some new Jub merch, so check that out. And then otherwise, have yourselves a great day. Sayonara, stay epic, everybody.